All right, so today we're doing a deep dive into some new research about breast cancer trends here in the U.S. And you know, I always like to start with the positive, and the good news is that there's actually a lot of it.
Absolutely.
But like with all things in health and science, the details really matter.
Yeah, there are some really encouraging trends that we can unpack, but there are also some head scratchers that kind of make you go, okay, what's going on here?
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
So let's start with the good news. I think one of the most encouraging things is this really significant drop we've seen in breast cancer deaths. It's actually been a really dramatic decline.
really is remarkable. Since 1989, the death rate from breast cancer has just plummeted by 44%. Think about that. We're talking over 500,000 lives saved.
500,000, that number is just, it's mind-blowing to me. What is driving that kind of progress?
It's a bunch of things. We have better treatments now, but early detection is huge. When breast cancer is caught early, it's just so much more treatable. That's why those regular screenings, starting at 40 for those at average risk, they're just absolutely crucial.
Right, so we're catching more cancers early on, which is giving people a much better chance at survival.
Exactly.
So that's the good news.
Yeah.
But, then we kind of get to those head-scratching details that you were talking about.
Right.
Even though fewer people are dying from breast cancer, the actual number of new cases each year is increased. It's like 1% every year, at least in recent years.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting, right? I mean, with all the advancements in medicine, more people are being diagnosed with breast cancer.
It does, doesn't it? To make things even more interesting, that increase is a bit more pronounced in women under 50, which is kind of unusual compared to historical patterns.
Oh, okay. So that's definitely something to, pay attention to. What's the thinking behind why we're seeing an increase in new cases, especially with younger women?
I wish I knew the perfect answer to that. Researchers are definitely working hard to figure that out, but there's no single answer yet. It's likely a combination of things: lifestyle, environment, genetics. There's still a lot that we don't fully understand about how cancer actually develops.
Right. And I think it's important to remember that these aren't just abstract statistics.
Oh, yeah.
This 1% increase that we're talking about, that's real people. That could be somebody listening to this right now who's facing this diagnosis. And then it gets even more, I guess, nuanced when we start looking at how this impacts different groups.
That's right, yeah. This is where we kind of have to talk about disparities. Because this 1% increase, it's not impacting every group in the same way. For instance, the rate of these new cases is increasing fastest among Asian American and Pacific Islander women.
Yeah, and not by a small margin either, right?
No, not at all. We're looking at like a 2.7% annual increase in new cases for Asian American and Pacific Islander women under 50, and a 2.5% increase for those 50 and older, significantly faster than other groups.
Wow. Okay, so what could explain that? Why is that particular group experiencing that rapid of an increase?
Yeah, so there are a few theories out there. One thought is that immigration patterns could be playing a role. Foreign-born Asian American and Pacific Islander women tend to have a higher risk than those who are born in the U.S. So, it could be factors related to their lifestyle, their environment, whatever it was before they immigrated here.
Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah.
So it could be something that maybe they were exposed to, or something about their life before they came to the U.S. What are some of the other possibilities?
Another area of research is the role of gene mutations, right? Which are basically changes in certain genes that can increase your risk of cancer. And, some of these mutations might be more common or even more impactful in this group. But again, this is an area where research is ongoing.
So it's like we're putting together a puzzle, trying to figure out why this is happening.
Yeah.
And it's not just Asian American and Pacific Islander women. Hispanic women are also seeing a more rapid increase compared to white, Black, or American, Indian, Alaska Native women.
That's right.
And I think this just all goes back to why it's so important to look at these statistics and break them down by the different groups.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't just make these blanket statements because it's really impacting everybody in different ways.
It shows how we really do have to look at all the smaller details and not just those big, broad statistics, because behind every percentage point, there's a real person and a real story.
Exactly. And these disparities aren't just about who gets diagnosed with breast cancer. They're also about who survives it.
Yeah, we can't really talk about this without talking about the fact that all the progress we've made in reducing breast cancer deaths, well, it's not exactly benefiting everybody equally.
True. And this is where we have to talk about some of the hard truths about the differences we see between races when we look at breast cancer outcomes. For example, Black women are about 5% less likely to develop breast cancer than white women,
You are
but
more likely to die from it.
exactly, significantly more likely. Black women are 38% more likely to die from breast cancer than white women. And this is mostly because the death rate in younger black women is just so tragically high.
It's heartbreaking, and it really underscores how this isn't an older person's disease like a lot of people think. Do you have any statistics off the top of your head that really show that?
Absolutely. One that always kind of blows my mind is that black women who are 20 to 29 years old have double the death rate from breast cancer than white women of the same age.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's unacceptable. And it's not just black women who are disproportionately affected by this. American Indian and Alaska Native women, they also face a higher risk of dying from breast cancer, even though they get it less often than white women.
Right. American Indian and Alaska Native women are about 10% less likely to be diagnosed with breast cancer compared to white women,
Hmm.
but their death rate is still about 6% higher. So
Mm.
even though they're not getting it as much, they're still more likely to die from it. Right. Which just shows that there's something else going on beyond just genetics and lifestyle choices.
Yeah. So what kind of factors are we talking about here? Like, what are some of the reasons behind these disparities?
Well, access to quality healthcare is huge.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have good health insurance, or if you live in a rural area where there aren't a lot of doctors or specialists, you're less likely to get those early screenings and treatments that we know makes such a big difference.
So it's like someone might not even know that they have breast cancer until it's too late, until it's more advanced and harder to treat.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's a big part of it. And there's actually some really fascinating research happening now
Yeah.
where scientists are looking at how things like discrimination and access to healthy food in neighborhoods could actually impact cancer development, like at a biological level.
Wait, so you're saying that things like poverty and discrimination could actually change someone's biology and make them more likely to get cancer?
Yeah, that's exactly what this research is suggesting, which is honestly kind of a new way of thinking about this. It's not just about the choices that we make, it's about the larger forces that shape our lives and how those can actually impact our health. But let's actually zoom out a little bit from the national picture because there's another really interesting thing here. Even within the U.S., where you live can have a big impact on your breast cancer risk.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that, because I feel like people don't really talk about that a lot.
Right. We talk about, is it in my genes?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I have family history of this? But geography is really interesting. There's actually a pretty big range in breast cancer rates across the U.S.
Like, how much of a difference are we talking about? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so in Nevada, the rate is about 113 cases per 100,000 women. And then in North Carolina, it's closer to 143 cases per 100,000. So, there's a difference there. And get this, the gap in death rates is even bigger.
Oh, wow. So where you live could actually influence your chances of surviving breast cancer. That's kind of scary to think about.
It is. For example, in Massachusetts, the death rate is about 15 per 100,000 women. But in Washington, D.C., it's 24 per 100,000.
That's a huge difference, especially considering how geographically close those two places are. What could be causing that much of a difference?
Well, it's a bunch of different things. Demographics are a big part of it. Different states have different racial and ethnic groups. And like we talked about, some of those groups have a higher risk than others.
Right. And then we have to consider access to healthcare, which we've already talked about,
Yeah.
can vary widely from one state to another.
Exactly. Things like whether or not a state expanded Medicaid or if there are enough doctors in a certain area, that can all have a huge impact on whether or not someone's able to get screened and treated for breast cancer.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have to look at other things like obesity and smoking rates.
Yeah. It's like all these statistics, they're not just numbers on a page. They're really representing people's lives and all the different challenges that they might be facing. And speaking of real people, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was hearing from some of the doctors who are actually seeing these trends playing out every day in their clinics.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's one thing to read about it, but it's another to actually see how this is impacting real people.
Yeah, and one story that really stuck with me was from this oncologist, Dr. Carmen Calfa. She's at the University of Miami. And she was talking about how she's seeing more and more young women being diagnosed with breast cancer. Like, she even had one patient who was only 20 years old.
Wow, 20.
Yeah.
That's really young.
Yeah. And it really drives home the point that this is not just an older person's disease like we tend to think.
Right. It makes you wonder what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And, it makes me think maybe this trend, as concerning as it is, maybe it could also be an opportunity.
Oh, okay. I like the way you think. Tell me more about that. What kind of an opportunity?
Well, it makes you think, like, If cancer is affecting younger and younger people, maybe we need to totally rethink how we approach this whole thing. Like, we can't just assume it's something that only happens to older people.
You're right. For a long time, cancer has been seen as an older person's disease,
Mm.
and that's just not true anymore.
Yeah. And maybe this can be like a wake-up call. Maybe it can make us focus more on prevention and early detection, for everybody, not just people of a certain age.
Yeah, I love that. If we stop thinking about cancer as something that only affects older adults, we might see more research funding, more resources for younger patients, and just more awareness overall.
Right. It's like changing the whole narrative around cancer. And maybe those changes could lead to other positive things like healthier lifestyles, maybe stricter environmental regulations, all those things that could really impact cancer risk in the long run.
I totally agree. It's about moving from this reactive approach, like we're just waiting for cancer to happen,
Uh-huh.
to a more proactive approach where we're doing everything we can to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Right. Like imagine a world with way less cancer, no matter how old you are, your race, or where you live. That's a future worth fighting for.
Absolutely. We definitely have a long way to go. But these trends that we're seeing, they're pushing us to ask the tough questions and hopefully find some better answers.
I completely agree. And, we've covered a lot of ground today. It's been, I don't know, kind of a lot to process, but
Mm.
I think these conversations are so important to have. And hopefully our listeners are walking away feeling informed and empowered.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
Empowered to talk to their doctor, ask questions, and advocate for themselves. Knowledge is power.
I love that. Knowledge is power. And by staying informed, we can all be part of creating a healthier future for everybody. So thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the world of breast cancer. And until next time, take care.